Today we are going to be looking at geometric sequences. Geometric sequence contains a pattern where a fixed amount is multiplied from one term to the next term. This number that we are multiplying from one term to another, we call that our common ratio, and we use the variable r. So in the past, we looked at arithmetic sequences. So that amount going between number to number is going to be added or subtracted, while geometric is being multiplied. So let's find the common ratios here. We are going from 2 to 6. So you can think about it as dividing the two terms to find the number, or you can think about it as 2 times what gives you 6. That's 3. And that works here also. 6 times 3 is 18, and 18 times 3 is 54. So our common ratio is 3. Now, let's look at the sequence 2, -4, 8, -16, continuing on. So 2 times what gives you -4? That's -2. And if we do -4 times -2, negative and negative make a +8. And it continues on. So 8 times -2 is a -16, so our common ratio is -2. The next one, 1/2 to 1/4 to 1/8 to 1/16. You're multiplying between the two. If you need to, you can use your calculator for the fractions. Just make sure you put parentheses around the fraction itself when you divide. So you can do 1/4 divided by 1/2. When you do that, you'll get 1/2. Or 1/2 times 1/2 gives you 1/4. And the pattern continues on. So we're multiplying by 1/2 each time. So our common ratio is 1/2. Don't forget, when you write your common ratio, it needs to be multiplication. So now we need to find the next 3 terms. So the first thing you have to do is figure out what your common ratio is and then continue the pattern. So if we go from -1.25 to 2.5, that might be a little tricky to figure out if you aren't using a calculator. So think about -5 to 10. When you go from -5 to +10, you're multiplying by a -2. So here's the same thing, -1.25 times -2. Negative and the negative make a +2.5. Our common ratio is -2. Now we're multiplying it from our last number. 10 times -2 gives us -20. Now, -2 times -20 gives us a +40. And -2 times +40 is a -80. If you notice, if our common ratio is negative, it's going to alternate positive to negatives in our sequence itself. Okay, let's look at the next one. 1/5 to 1 to 5 to 25. So if we have 1/5 to 1, we are multiplying by 5. Again, if you get confused with the fractions, start with the whole numbers. 5 to 25 multiplying by 5. So our common ratio is 5. Now continue the pattern. 25 times 5 gives us our next term of 125. Now we have to multiply it by our ratio of 5, and we get 625. Multiply it by our common ratio of 5, and we get 3 125. The last one here, 27 to 9. To go from 27 to 9, you are dividing by 3. 9 to 3 dividing by 3. But our common ratio, we need to remember, is written as multiplication. So dividing by 3 is equaling to multiplying by 1/3. So our common ratio is 1/3. So 1 times 1/3 gives us 1/3. 1/3 times 1/3 gives us 1/9. And 1/3 times 1/9 is 1/27. Continuing the pattern. So now let's look at our formula for geometric sequences. So we have A, and we say sub n. The little number underneath is sub. So A sub n equals A sub 1 times r raised to the n minus 1. So n. N is going to be your nth term. So think of it as the term you are finding. A sub 1 is your first term. The 1 itself means first, so the first term. R is your common ratio. And this n here is the same n, so the nth term, the term you are finding. So let's look at just writing the equation for the nth term. So our equation here will have n in it still. So we need to know our first term. So A sub 1. Our first term in the sequence is 2, the very first one. Our R, our common ratio. How do we go from one to the other? 2 to 6, 6 to 18, 18 to 54. We are multiplying by 3 each time. Now when we write it, do A sub n equaling our first term, 2, times our rate, which is 3 to the n minus 1. We are just writing it. Now if we go straight down below, we need to calculate the 12th term. So if we're calculating the 12th term, our n is going to equal 12. So we are just substituting it in to the formula above. So a to the 12th is equaling 2 times 3 to the 12 minus 1. Now let's simplify it. 12 minus 1 is 11. So we're going to do 2 times 3 to the 11th. Now calculate. A sub 12 equals 2 times 3 to the 11th. Go on and type in 2 times 3 raised to the 11th power into your calculator, and you will get 354,294. And that is your 12th term's value. Okay, let's go back up. We need to write the sequence as an equation for the nth term. So figure out your first term, which is 2. Now your rate. You go in between each one, you are multiplying by -2 each time. So when we write it, we write A sub n equals our first term, which is 2, times our rate -2 raised to the n minus 1. Now we are going to write the 12th term, or calculate the 12th term. So we're going to still use the equation above and substitute 12 in for n. We're going to calculate A sub 12 equaling 2 times -2 to the 12 minus 1 power. Simplify. Becomes the power of 11. And then we're going to type into your calculator 2 times, make sure you do parentheses, -2 raised to the 11th, and you will get 4,096 to be your 12th term. Let's look at the last problem here. Your first term is 27, and your common ratio going in between, you are dividing by 3 each time, but we write it as 1/3. So a sub n is equal to 27, which is our first term, times 1/3 raised to the n minus 1. We are finding the 12th term, so our n is equal to 12. Substituting it to the formula above, a sub 12 equaling 27 times 1/3, 12 to the minus 1 power. Simplify. And then when you calculate this, you are going to get a decimal if you're using your calculator, but make sure you hit math enter enter to get the fraction. You get 1/6,561, and that is our 12th term. So this is your lesson on geometric sequences. Please reach out if you have any questions.